holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And now I want to try a call and response with you. You know the words. They're on the hard drive of your soul, so we'll just see what happens here, right? The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Lift up your hearts.
We lift them to the Lord.
Let us give thanks to the Lord our God.
It is right to give him thanks and praise.
Amen. You get an A+ in Lutheran liturgy right there. Now, how do we know those words? Well, some would say we know them by heart, you know? And this morning, I want to speak from my heart to your hearts. So, Luke, let's go to the first slide there. Sometimes it just takes a little bit for my brain to send the message back there, you know, and there we go. So, okay, so just put your hand on your heart, if you would, to just make sure you're alive here this morning. And isn't the heart an amazing thing? And I am so glad to be here with you in the heart. First, I speak a word of thanks to you. So next slide, Luke. Thank you for coming today. Special thanks to Pastor Craig, to Deacon Lynn, and thank you for your support of ELCA World Hunger, for the support Fund for Leaders, disaster response, and all of that. And as your pastor said, I serve as the director of the campaign for the ELCA, and Wayne and Phyllis Rickert serve on our national steering committee. So thank you for sharing them with us. Secondly, let's go to the next slide there, Luke. What a great gospel lesson we have here this morning, right? That passage from Luke 5. Here we hear, once again, all about abundance. Just like we heard a few Sundays ago at the wedding of Cana, where Jesus kind of Jesus says, I will serve no wine before it's time. And in the Gospel of John, it's really important, what time is it? Jesus says, it's not yet my hour. And the hour that's really important, the time that's really important in the Gospel of John, is that when Jesus is up on the cross and he draws all people to himself, just as he had promised. And then in today's Gospel lesson, we hear of the first PowerPoint ever. The disciples have been out fishing all night long. Jesus says, you should try over there. And he does this very important PowerPoint and points right there. And all of a sudden, it's sushi for everyone. Now, this story isn't just about I'm a bread baker, and as you also know, I'm a fundraiser, so I like to raise dough in a lot of ways, okay? So I was at this class at King Arthur Flour in upstate Vermont. Yeah. bread baker. He's a Benedictine monk. His name is Father Dom. And he says bread baking is a lot better than aromatherapy because you should not eat your candle. He also says bread is very forgiving. And that's something you know and that I hope you take to heart when you come. But you know, you have that sourdough starter. And as I've spent the last couple of years now working with sourdough starter, I think a sourdough starter is very similar to the disciples. Sourdough starter is very similar to New Hope Lutheran Church. So Jesus takes average, regular people, and he worked with them, and he worked with them. And then he set them aside. Something in those fishermen that they didn't even know that they had themselves. And I think you know? Is that sourdough starter needs to get mixed up with the rest of the recipe. And the flavor, the energy of sourdough is just like that of the disciples or of you and me. Called to get mixed up in this loving recipe that God has for the world. Does anyone work for Red Lobster? Because I don't want to offend anyone here this morning. So one Sunday morning, every Sunday I'm out preaching in a different congregation. And the great part of being a guest preacher is that you can please everybody in the entire congregation. Let me tell you how that happens. So a third of you are happy that your pastor kind of gets a Sunday off when he has a guest preacher. So another third of you are happy that as good a preacher as Pastor Craig is, you'd like to hear a second opinion every once in a while. So that's 2/3. And the other third of you are going to be very happy that I'm not back here next Sunday. And that adds up to 100%. And then usually after worship, I stand at the back of the door and someone comes up and says, I'm one of the third. Okay, so one Sunday morning, before I go to church, I'm watching TV, not because I want to, but just for research purposes. And this commercial for endless shrimp comes on, and they're talking all about endless shrimp. And it's boiled shrimp and broiled shrimp and fried shrimp and all this shrimp, you know, and there are all these pictures of shrimp kind of cavorting and mountains of shrimp and all this type of stuff. And I thought to myself, I've never thought of shrimp for breakfast before, but I'm kind of interested in this now. And they were talking about endless shrimp. And then the announcer said, but you better hurry, because endless shrimp doesn't last forever. And then so I said to the TV, well, then it's not endless, is it? Well, so that's kind of a half promise. It's not even a real promise. One might even in today's climate or culture call it a fake promise, right? But what about these promises we have from God? I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. Now we have these three amazing text messages for us this morning. So let's go to this next slide here. And I love artwork. And so last week, my wife Sue Ann and I, and she's with us here this morning, that we were in Houston. From about the 14th century. And it's a picture of the Holy Trinity. And what was interesting there, to read the notes there, it said that in Peruvian kind of theology, that whenever the Holy Trinity is pictured, it isn't pictured the way it often is in kind of Northern European artwork, where God is an old man and Jesus is on the cross, and then there's kind of this bird that's flying across, the scene for the Holy Trinity. But God, the three persons, certain that you have never ever sung. And one of the reasons why you have never ever sung LBW, or if you were raised in the Missouri Synod like I was, in the Lutheran hymnal, it was a 3-page hymn. And there's no way Lutherans are going to sing a 3-page hymn, no matter how good it is. Even if it has a good beat and it's easy to dance to, we're not going to sing it. So I think the ELW people then jammed it 3 pages all into 1 page. And now I don't think any of us is going to sing it. One Lutheran boy who sang Isaiah in a Vision did of old. And I'll give you the clue who that probably was. Now, but it's majestic. And maybe next Sunday it will be the hymn of the day. Who knows? Who knows? Miracles do happen. Let's go to the next slide. But music is so important. So Luther said this about music. A person who does not regard music as a marvelous creation of God must be a clodhopper indeed, and does not deserve to be even called a human being. But he should be permitted to hear nothing but the braying of asses and the grunting of hogs. Now, of course, that sounds a lot more spiritual in German. Than it does in English. Luther besides being a theological genius, was an amazing communicator, right? And had that ability to talk from his heart to our hearts as well. Next slide, please. So the second passage that we have from 1 Corinthians 15, and the picture there is by Lucas Cranach. It's Crucifixion, and he painted this many different times. His workshop, if you've ever been to Wittenberg, Germany, Lucas Cranach was kind of like the Sam Drucker of Wittenberg. If you remember that from Petticoat Juncture, that Sam Drucker was, he had all the jobs in the town, and Cranach was the mayor of Wittenberg. He was also the pharmacist, and he was one of the premier artists that was able to communicate Luther's work to a whole new generation. But in 1 Corinthians, and Bible study is a lot like real estate. It all comes down to one word, right? Location, location, location. So what's 1 Corinthians 13 all about? Love. We heard that last week. It's the love chapter. And then we have 1 Corinthians 14, where it talks a little bit more about how we live together as the people of God. And then chapter 15 is about resurrection and what it means. And Paul is writing there in chapter 15 about how he came to faith, how he heard the words of God. And so he says, "Now I would remind you, brothers and sisters, of the good news that I proclaimed to you, which you in turn received, in which you also stand, through which you are also being saved, if you hold firmly to the message that I proclaimed to you, unless you have come to believe in vain." And then he says this, and it's really important what he says there. "For I handed on to you of first importance what in turn I had received." And the word that's used there, handed on, in Greek is this Greek word called paradidomi. And that word is used to hand on, but it's also used and translated as the word betray. So that when Judas hands on Jesus to the Roman soldiers. So handing on something can either be something that's a gift, a tradition, or it can be a betrayal. And I think right there, Paul is also acknowledging what happens to us sometimes as church people, because sometimes at church we get caught, tied up in, well, that's the way we've always done it. That everyone says, I'm not worthy to share this good news. But once again, like that sourdough starter, God sees something in us that we don't even see in ourselves. Now, as a bread baker, I like to make pretzels. And so you see on the left-hand side there, the way a pretzel normally looks. And pretzels always come about during Lent because they used to pass kind of dietary regulations. It's just flour, water, salt, and so. One more story and then we'll close. So next slide, please, Luke. So I know sometimes, and we talked a little bit during the time before the service about some of the things with ELCA World Hunger. So I just want to tell you one thing about that. And then we're going to talk about cows today too. So I was in Senegal 2 years ago, and was there and went to a Lutheran church, and we went from the town and we were going to go out to an ELCA World Hunger feeding station and health clinic that's sponsored by ELCA World Hunger. So we went on the highway, and then we went to a fork in the road, and there was a nice road going this way, and there was a rickety-rackety road going this way. And where do you think the Lutherans had property? Yeah, like that, way out there on the rickety-rackety road. And we pull up there, and there are 10 people there. And they're members of a group called the Association, not the ones who sang Cherish. 9 of them were women. 1 of them was a man. They were a subset of a larger group of 120 people, members of the association. And to be a member of the association, you have to be HIV positive. So here we are in rural Senegal, 20 mosques out in the countryside, and 1 ELCA Lutheran church. And it's a feeding station and a health clinic. And this one woman says in Wolof, which was her native language, then got translated into French, and then that got translated into English. She said, if it wasn't for ELCA World Hunger getting medicine here, I would be dead. The other 9 nodded their heads in agreement. And then she said, if it wasn't for ELCA World Hunger providing food for my family would be starving. And the other 9 nodded their heads in agreement. I wish we would have been filming that because it was so powerful. And so that her gratitude could be expressed to you, thankful to you for the good things that you do through church. But at the same time, I'm kind of glad it wasn't filmed because it was such a powerful, intimate moment. But I tell you that story for 2 reasons. Sometimes we wonder, I know, does my $5, does my $10, does my $25 Secondly, I also know that as donors, and all of us are donors, that sometimes when we give to something, we wonder, does it really go where they say it's going to go, right? Does it really get there? Is this really doing what they said it's going to do? And I want you to know it really does. So on behalf of all those people, the association, thank you for what you do. Last but not least, Pastor Craig has been helping you, Pastor Lynn, Pastor Scott, too, thinking during these days of Epiphany what it means to be manifest. What it meant for the disciples. It's kind of crazy, isn't it? On the best fishing day they ever had, they quit at the top of their game. And decided that's it, and now we're going to try to catch people and share the good news of Jesus Christ. Amen.